The parkour phenomenon. As children, many of us have been in long drives with our parents or guardians and have gotten bored while stuck in the vehicles. This perpetual cycle of ride-alongs has caused many of our young minds to imagine creatures or people outside of our car windows that would run alongside the vehicles and maybe even do cool tricks, such as jump from telephone pole to telephone pole or run along on top of fences. I do not know the actual term for this, but I will call it the parkour phenomenon. The most interesting thing about this experience, however, is knowing just how many kids it has happened to, from all around the world. It seems that this illusion is not linked to just one culture or country. It can happen anywhere, to anyone with no real prompting. The only real link in common, it seems, is that children are often the only ones to do it, to see them. Perhaps it is because of their exceptional imaginations. Or, maybe, it's something a little more real. In my childhood, I, too, had my own creature that would sprint beside whatever vehicle I was in. During stops, it would stop with us and wait to be in motion once again with head facing forward and limbs trembling in anticipation. No matter what, it would match our speed, and it always kept pace with the vehicle, even while navigating obstacles such as hedges or fences. I'm not sure what all people would imagine their creatures to look like, but mine was not something the average kid would normally think up. Mine was an emaciated humanoid with pale, gray skin and no clothes on. But, of course, there was nothing dirty to look at, either, since I was only a child. Its limbs and body were thin and stretched out, with the head appearing a bit more bulbous in comparison. The eyes themselves were very sunken in and only showed as black pits, with the mouth being full of tiny, needle-like teeth. Like I said, it was nothing like a child should readily be imagining, especially not for fun. For just about every drive I was taken on, that creature, who I called Mr. Winder, due to his pale complexion, would run right alongside where I sat. Without fail, he would keep pace and run right over objects in his way, as if his hands and feet never touched them. For a long time, he provided me with a lot of entertainment, but as I grew older, like most kids, I stopped envisioning him with me. That is, until recently. When I was 17, I finally got my driver's license. I had been practicing and studying for the test for a while beforehand, so actually getting it done was a breeze. However, I had started to notice Mr. Winter appearing again. This time, he did it while I was the one driving. The first time it happened, I was headed to my first job, after a week of having been there. It was a retail job, so I had to leave decently early to get there and help get ready for the day. When I pulled out of my driveway and started going down the road, my eye caught a glimpse of something white and blurry from the corner. Upon turning my head to look, I saw him. Mr. Winder was running on all fours from between two houses, headed straight for my car. At first, I was obviously terrified, as I had not been expecting to see such a thing coming at me so quickly. I sped up to try and get away, but he still came and soon was running right by the driver's side door. He didn't look in at me, but his head was next to mine, only the glass providing a barrier or protection. After I tried to quickly turn down several streets to lose the creature, it finally dawned on me what was going on. Something in my brain clicked that this creature was something I had made up. He was only in my head, and his name came back to me. I finally calmed down after that, though I was still weirded out as to why. He just suddenly showed up after so long an absence, and with the fact I was no longer a child. During every turn and stop, he followed me. No matter how fast or slow I went, he matched my speed perfectly. And, when I stopped at lights or signs, he would also stop and sit down like a person playing leapfrog, with his knees in the air and hands on the ground, between his legs. His gaze always stared straight ahead. For weeks he would do this. I would pull out of the driveway to go anywhere, and Mr. Winder would come charging out from around a house or behind some trees to then sprint alongside me. When I came home, he would disappear as he had come the moment I reached the driveway. After a while, I got used to his presence again and even kind of looked forward to it, as it made my daily commute a little more interesting. However, things started to eventually take a turn. One day, while I was driving along, he was there. It was fine and now normal, But what was abnormal was what happened when I stopped at a red light. He stopped with me, and, instead of looking ahead intently like a prepared racer, Mr. Winter turned his head to stare directly at me. His voids for eyes bore into my very being, and his mouth hung open to reveal all of his needle teeth while he sat in that leapfrog pose. A sinister chill went down my spine as we locked gazes for a minute. For some reason, I couldn't look away, not until a car behind me honked, and I realized the light had turned green. I started driving again, and Mr. Winter followed as normal, his attention turning back to where he was going like nothing had ever happened. For days after that, he would do the same thing. Whenever I had to stop, Mr. Winter would turn his head to stare me down with his mouth agape. I don't know why this would happen, and it unsettled me greatly. The worst part was that no matter how hard I tried to imagine him doing something else or him not being there, nothing ever changed. In fact, he just seemed to stare at me more intently, if that was even possible. Eventually, he started to get bolder. I think he actually began to be real, because, one day, while I was pulling into my driveway from work, Mr. Winter didn't run off like usual. This time, he moved to the other side of my yard and then sat down in his frog pose and watched me reluctantly exit my car. I watched him wearily back as I unlocked the front door and headed inside. The door locked behind me, and I peeked out the curtains to see him now several feet closer to the house. He still sat in that pose and stared, but he was closer now. In those few seconds of me moving from my door into the window, he had closed some distance and sat back down like before. I shivered but tried to go about the rest of my day normally. Nothing else happened for a while, and when I checked back in an hour, he was gone. But the next day, when I came home from work, he did the same thing. He sat at the end of my yard and watched me enter the house. Then, when I peeked outside again, he sat closer to the front door and stared directly at me. I tried to ask my parents and friends about this afterward, if they ever saw something running alongside their vehicles as kids and if they noticed anything strange outside now. My friends said a few of them had made up imaginary creatures to do parkour outside their car windows as kids, but they hadn't seen them since they were very young. Nobody at all had been seeing Mr. Winter like I had been. None of them saw him at all. It seemed he was only visible to me. After a few months of seeing him and continuing our unsettling routine, I was getting ready for bed one night. It was around 10 p.m., and I was getting a glass of water before I turned in for the night. I was alone in the kitchen with the light on, and I went to the sink to fill up my glass. Suddenly, I jumped and dropped the glass on the floor as Mr. Winter's pale face popped into my window from the outside, sending sharp shards all over the floor and my feet. However, I failed to notice the sting of fresh cuts or the moisture of blood welling up from them. My eyes and brain were too focused on him. He was so close to me that the tip of his nose pressed against the glass, and hot breath started to fog it up at his mouth. All the while, his pitch-black eye sockets stared me down at eye level. Those voided pits were like a deep abyss, and I inwardly feared being sucked into them. I did scream a bit out of surprise and fear, but when my parents came down to check what was wrong, he was gone. The steam on the glass was ebbing away quickly. My parents were more concerned about the broken glass and my bleeding feet than anything. When I told my dad that I had seen someone's face in the window, hoping he wouldn't just call me crazy, he noticed the fog, too. He actually noticed it. That meant that what I had seen, that Mr. Winter, at least in that instance, had been real. Up until then, nobody else had been able to see him, but he left visible steam on the outside of the kitchen window. I had tangible evidence that this creature stalking me is not just a figment of my mind, though. I didn't know whether to be happy that I wasn't crazy or terrified of the growing alternative. My dad went outside with a pistol in hand and did a quick search, but he didn't find anything, nor any more evidence of someone, or something, lurking about the house. We double-checked all the doors and windows were locked, then headed off to bed. After taking care of my injured feet, there was nothing more to be that night. The next morning, Mr. Winter wasn't there when I went to work, but he was there when I came back. He didn't run beside me on my journey home, yet he sat by the front door when I pulled in my driveway. I shut the car off but didn't get out and just simply watched him as he watched me. Soon, he started to sluggishly crawl over. It was odd to see him move so slowly, so deliberately. Before that time, I had only ever seen him run like any person would run on all fours, if they tried. But now, he took it one limb at a time and crawled over, his movements long and exaggerated. He came to my car door and sat down, staring right into my window. His breath started to fog it up, too, just like that night. I didn't know what to do. Fear was rising up fast. He had never done anything to hurt me, but can you imagine having something so grotesque just staring you down from right outside your car window, trapping you inside? After a bit, I finally got the idea to honk the horn. Maybe somebody from inside would come out. Maybe that would scare him off. Thankfully, my mother did emerge from the house. She opened the door, and Mr. Winter took off the moment the doorknob turned. He disappeared behind the house, and I took the opportunity to bolt inside, past my mom. That was yesterday. Last night, he came to my bedroom window, on the second story. Somehow, he managed to get onto the little bit of roof that sits under my window, making up the porch ceiling. He sat there, outside my window, and he watched me. I sat and observed him back, but he never moved until I walked to the other side of the room. Only then did his head slowly turn to keep facing me, to keep me directly inside of those voids. The only thing that made him stop watching me was when I got brave enough to go over and shut the blinds. But I'm scared to go to work now. I'm terrified Mr. Winter will get in and try to hurt me or take me away to where he always runs off to. Tonight, he started to tap on my window's glass, and I'm getting an odd feeling to go outside.